My parents called me their bad luck. When I left, I took all my luck with me. I grew up being told I was the reason everything went wrong in my family. My parents had my older brother first, and he was perfect. Good grades, good behavior, good at sports. Then they had me 3 years later, and according to them, that's when their luck ran out. My dad lost his job 6 months after I was born. My mom got into a car accident when I was 2. My grandmother died when I was 4. The family dog ran away when I was 5. Every bad thing that happened got pinned on me like I had some kind of curse attached to my existence. My mom started saying it as a joke at first. She'd laugh and call me her little storm cloud. Then it stopped being a joke. By the time I was 10, my parents openly blamed me for their problems. If the bill was higher than expected, it was because I was in the house using too much electricity. If something broke, it was because my bad energy made things fall apart. If my dad didn't get a promotion, it was because he had the burden of raising an unlucky child. My brother picked up on it and started calling me Jinx. The name stuck all through middle school and high school. I believed them for a long time. I thought maybe I really was cursed. I apologized constantly for things that weren't my fault. I tried to make myself small and invisible so my bad luck wouldn't spread. I got good grades hoping that would prove I wasn't a burden. I got a job at 16 and paid for my own clothes and school supplies so they couldn't say I was draining their money. Nothing I did changed how they saw me. When I was 17, my brother got accepted to a good college. My parents threw him a huge party and invited all their friends. They bragged about how he was going to be successful and make them proud. When I got accepted to the same college a year later with a better scholarship, my mom said it probably wouldn't last because things always fell apart for me. My dad said I should go to community college instead and save them the embarrassment when I inevitably failed. I went anyway. I left home at 18 with 2 suitcases and a bank account I'd been secretly filling for years. My parents didn't help me move. My brother didn't say goodbye. My mom told me to call when I needed to come home because she knew I would. I didn't call. College was hard, but not because of bad luck. It was hard because I had to unlearn everything my parents taught me about myself. I made friends for the first time. Real friends who didn't treat me like a curse. I joined clubs and studied things I actually cared about. I failed a test once, and my roommate said it was okay and we'd study harder next time. She didn't blame me for ruining anything. She just helped me do better. I graduated with honors. I got a job at an architecture firm in a city 4 hours from my hometown. I worked my way up for 5 years and became a project manager. I bought a small condo with my own money. I adopted a cat who didn't run away. I dated someone who actually liked being around me. Everything my parents said would fall apart stayed together because I built it myself without their voices in my head. Meanwhile, things got worse at home. My dad's drinking caught up with him and he lost another job. My mom's health declined because she refused to see doctors until problems became emergencies. My brother dropped out of college after 2 years and moved back home. He couldn't hold down a job and spent most of his time playing video games in his childhood bedroom. The golden child turned out to be fool's gold. They never connected the dots. They kept waiting for me to fail. My mom would call once a year on my birthday and ask how I was holding up. She said it like she expected me to be struggling. When I told her I got promoted, she said I shouldn't get too comfortable because good things don't last for people like me. When I told her I bought my condo, she asked how much debt I was in. When I told her I was happy, she laughed and said, "Give it time." I stopped telling her things. I stopped calling back. 3 years ago, my brother needed surgery and my parents couldn't afford it. My dad called me for the first time in years. He didn't ask how I was doing. He just said they needed money, and since I apparently had so much of it now, I should share with the family who raised me. I stare at my phone for 20 minutes after hanging up, my hands still shaking from hearing my father's voice demand money like I owe them something. The number 15,000 keeps repeating in my head like a broken record. 3 years of silence, and this is what breaks it. Not an apology or even a hello, just a dollar amount and the expectation that I'll pay it. My chest feels tight in a way I haven't experienced since I left home. That same crushing feeling of being blamed for existing. I set the phone down on the coffee table and watch it like it might ring again, like he might call back to say something worse. The living room gets darker as the sun sets, and I don't bother turning on the lights. My cat jumps onto the couch next to me, and I scratch behind her ears automatically, focusing on the soft fur instead of the anger building in my throat. Cillian comes home from work around 6:30 and finds me sitting in the same spot, still holding my phone even though I'd put it down earlier. I must have picked it back up without realizing. He drops his bag by the door, and I watch his face change as he takes in the dark room and my expression. I tell him about the call, and the words come out flat and mechanical, like I'm reading a grocery list instead of explaining how my father just demanded money after years of treating me like I was cursed. Cillian sits down next to me, and his jaw tightens in that way it does when he's angry but trying not to show it. He asks what my dad said exactly, and I repeat the conversation word for word because it's burned into my memory already. His face shifts from concern to something harder, protective, and somehow that makes me feel less crazy for being this upset. He asks if I'm okay, and the question makes me pause because I don't actually know the answer. Part of me wants to scream, part of me feels guilty for even being angry, and another part just feels sad and tired. I tell him I'm not sure, and he nods like that makes perfect sense. We sit in silence for a few minutes, and I try to sort through what I'm feeling. The anger makes sense. They called after 3 years just to ask for money. But the guilt confuses me. This nagging voice saying maybe I should help because he's family. Maybe refusing makes me just as bad as them. Then there's the sadness underneath it all. This heavy realization that this is what our relationship has become. That they only reach out when they need something from me. I grab my phone and pull up my therapist's contact information. My hands shake a little as I dial, and I get Milena's voicemail because it's after office hours. I leave a message asking if she has any emergency slots this week, because I can feel old patterns trying to crawl back into my brain. The voice in my head sounds exactly like my mother, telling me I'm being selfish, that family helps family, that good daughters don't abandon their brothers when they need surgery. I hate that voice, and I hate that it still has power over me after all these years. I hang up and tell Cillian I called my therapist, and he squeezes my hand, says that's a good idea. That night, I lie in bed staring at the ceiling while Cillian sleeps next to me. My brain won't shut off, just keeps cycling through memories I thought I'd dealt with already. I remember being 6 years old and my dad losing another job, how my mom said it was because having me around made him stressed and distracted. I was 6 months old when he lost the first job, and somehow that was my fault too. I remember the car accident when I was 2, how my mom told the story for years about how she was distracted thinking about me in the back seat and didn't see the other car. I remember my grandmother dying of cancer when I was 4, and my parents talking about bad luck following our family, looking at me when they said it like I'd personally given her the disease. The memories keep coming, each one a little cut that never quite healed, and I realize I'm crying without making any sound. Milena's office calls back the next morning while I'm getting ready for work. Her receptionist says she had a cancellation at 2 in the afternoon if I can make it. I call in sick to work, something I never do, and spend the morning pacing around my condo trying to distract myself. I clean the kitchen that's already clean. I organize my bookshelf by color, then by author, then back to color. I start 3 different shows on streaming and can't focus on any of them. When it's finally time to leave, I get to her office 15 minutes early and sit in my car rehearsing what I want to say. I walk into her office feeling like I've gone backwards in time, like I'm the anxious 23-year-old who first started therapy instead of the 28-year-old who thought she had her life together. Milena gestures to the familiar chair and I sit down, already feeling tears building up. She asks what happened and I tell her about the call, about my father's voice after 3 years, about the money demand, about all of it. The words pour out for 15 minutes straight and she just listens, occasionally nodding, letting me get it all out. When I finally stop talking, she waits a moment, then asks what I actually want to do. Not what I think I should do or what would make me a good person, but what I genuinely want. I admit I've already looked up Curtis's condition online, spent an hour last night reading medical websites about the surgery he needs. It's real and it's necessary, and without it, he could have serious complications. But I also know my parents have let him live at home rent-free for years, playing video games in his childhood bedroom while they paid for everything. They never made him get a job with insurance, never pushed him to be independent like they pushed me out the door at 18. I paid for my own clothes and school supplies at 16 while he's 31, and they still do his laundry. Milena asks why Curtis doesn't have insurance, and the question makes me stop and think. I realize it's because he's never held a job long enough to qualify for benefits. He's worked maybe 6 months total in the last 5 years, always quitting or getting fired, always moving back home where my parents enable him. They let him stay dependent while they blamed me for being a burden when I was literally a child. The double standard sits heavy in my chest. I was paying my own way as a teenager, and he's in his 30s getting supported completely. But somehow I'm the one who gets the call demanding money. We spend the next 30 minutes talking about the difference between helping family in an actual crisis versus rewarding the same broken patterns that made me leave in the first place. Milena points out that giving them money without any conditions would just confirm their belief that I exist to solve their problems, that I'm responsible for fixing everything that goes wrong in their lives. She asks what message it sends if I hand over $15,000 after they spent years telling me I was the source of all their bad luck. I hadn't thought about it that way, but she's right. It would be like agreeing with them, like accepting that I do owe them something for the burden of raising their cursed daughter. I leave therapy with homework to write down exactly what I'm willing to offer and what my boundaries are before I respond to my father. The idea of setting terms instead of just saying yes or no feels strange and scary and maybe a little powerful. Milena reminds me that I get to decide what kind of relationship I have with them, that I don't have to accept the role they assigned me. I drive home thinking about what reasonable help might actually look like, something that doesn't make me feel like I'm betraying myself, but also doesn't completely abandon Curtis when he's sick. That night, Cillian gets home around 7 and finds me sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open and a notebook covered in scribbled thoughts. He sets down his work bag and comes over to kiss the top of my head before asking what I want for dinner. I tell him I don't really care, and he suggests we order from the Thai place down the street since neither of us feels like cooking. While we wait for the food to arrive, he sits across from me and asks how I'm doing with everything. I close my laptop and admit I've been going in circles all day trying to figure out what the right thing to do is. He reaches across the table and takes my hand, reminding me there might not be a clear right answer, but that doesn't mean I can't set boundaries around what I'm willing to offer. The food arrives and we eat at the table instead of in front of the TV like we usually do. Between bites of pad thai, I tell him I keep thinking about Curtis actually needing the surgery and how it feels wrong to just ignore that completely. Cillian nods and says he gets it, that wanting to help doesn't make me responsible for fixing everything my parents have messed up. He suggests maybe I could help Curtis directly with finding resources instead of just handing money to my parents who haven't managed their finances well in decades. The idea clicks something into place in my brain. I could research hospital payment plans and financial assistance programs, maybe even help Curtis apply for medical assistance if he qualifies. That feels different from writing a check to my father and pretending it will solve anything long-term. Cillian points out that way I'd be helping Curtis get the medical care he needs without enabling my parents to avoid taking any responsibility for how they got here. We talk through what that might look like practically, and I start feeling less trapped between two bad options. Saturday morning, I wake up determined to draft an email response before I lose my nerve. Cillian goes to the gym, and I make coffee and sit down at my laptop with a clear head for the first time since my father's call. I open a new message and type my father's email address in the recipient line, then stare at the blank space trying to figure out how to say what I need to say. The first draft comes out angry, and I delete it. The second one sounds too apologetic, like I'm asking permission to have boundaries. The third attempt feels closer. I write that I understand Curtis needs surgery, and I want to help him get the medical care he needs. Then I explain I'm not comfortable giving money directly to them, but I am willing to help Curtis research hospital financial assistance programs and payment plan options. I spend an hour rewording sentences and taking out anything that sounds defensive or like I'm justifying myself. By lunch, I have something that feels clear and firm without being mean. I save it as a draft instead of sending it right away because I want to read it again tomorrow with fresh eyes. Sunday, I read through it twice and make a few small changes. Cillian reads it over my shoulder and says it sounds reasonable and compassionate while still protecting my boundaries. I move my cursor to the send button and hesitate. Part of me knows sending this will probably make my parents angry. They want money with no strings attached, and I'm offering something different. But I also know that if I just give them what they want, I'll resent myself, and nothing will actually change. I take a breath and click send before I can second-guess myself again. Monday afternoon, my phone rings while I'm reviewing blueprints at work, and I see my mother's name on the screen. My stomach drops because I wasn't expecting her to call. I should let it go to voicemail, but some old instinct makes me answer. Before I can even say hello, she launches in about how she can't believe I would be. So ungrateful after everything they did raising me. Her voice has that sharp edge that used to make me want to disappear when I was younger. She says they sacrificed so much for me and my brother, and this is how I repay them. I try to interrupt to explain that I offered to help, but she talks right over me. She brings up the email and says they don't need my charity. They need family loyalty. The word loyalty coming from her mouth almost makes me laugh, except it also makes my chest hurt. I spent my whole childhood being loyal to people who blamed me for existing. I managed to get a few words in about wanting to help Curtis find financial assistance, and she cuts me off again, saying that's not real help. Real help would be writing a check and trusting them to handle it. I can hear my father saying something in the background, but can't make out the words. My mother switches tactics and starts listing all the times I failed them growing up. She brings up the time I got a B in math in 6th grade like it was some massive disappointment instead of a normal grade. She mentions the school play I didn't get cast in 8th grade as evidence I wasn't trying hard enough. She twists every normal childhood moment into proof that I was defective somehow. I feel myself getting quieter on the phone. My response is getting shorter. It's like I'm 14 again, sitting at the kitchen table while she explains why the broken dishwasher is somehow connected to my bad energy. I hate that I'm falling into this pattern, but I can't seem to stop myself from shrinking. Then she says something that makes my whole body go still. She tells me I probably have plenty of money to spare since I don't have kids draining my resources like Curtis drained theirs. The casual way she blames a child for being born and needing things breaks something loose in my chest. I actually laugh out loud and it surprises both of us. The laugh isn't happy, it's the sound of something finally snapping after being bent too far for too long. She asks what's so funny in this cold voice, and I tell her that's exactly the problem. She's still blaming other people for her own choices, and I'm done being part of that. My voice shakes, but I keep talking. I say I spent my whole life being blamed for things I couldn't control, and I'm not doing it anymore. She tries to interrupt like she always does, but this time I don't let her. I talk over her and explain that I'll help Curtis directly with finding resources and payment options, but I won't hand over money to enable them to keep refusing to take responsibility for their situation. I can hear my father yelling something in the background about disrespectful children and ungrateful daughters. My mother's voice shifts from angry to ice cold in a way that used to terrify me as a kid. She says fine, they'll figure it out themselves like they always have to. No thanks to me. She hangs up before I can say anything else, and I'm left standing in my office holding my phone with my hand shaking. I walk to the bathroom and lock myself in a stall for 10 minutes trying to get my breathing under control. My whole body feels like it's vibrating with adrenaline and anger and something that might be pride. I actually stood up to her. I said things I've thought for years, but never had the courage to say out loud. When I finally come out, I wash my face with cold water and go back to my desk. I can't focus on work for the rest of the afternoon. Cillian finds me that evening sitting on the couch staring at nothing. He sits down next to me, and I immediately start crying these angry, frustrated tears that I've been holding in since the phone call ended. He pulls me against his chest and just holds me while I cry. When I can finally talk, I tell him about the call, and how my mother brought up every childhood failing like I was on trial. I tell him about the comment about kids draining resources, and how something just broke in me, hearing her blame Curtis for existing the same way she blamed me. Cillian runs his hand through my hair and says, "Setting boundaries doesn't make me a bad person." He reminds me that they called asking for help, but the second I offered help that came with any conditions, they rejected it. They wanted me to fix their problem without them having to change anything about how they operate. I know he's right, but it still hurts. Some part of me kept hoping they might surprise me and actually hear what I was saying. Instead, they proved they're exactly who I've always known them to be. I spend the next day drafting an email to Curtis. I find his old address in my contacts from years ago and stare at the blank message for 20 minutes trying to figure out what to say. I delete 3 different versions before settling on something short and practical. I write that I want to help him directly with researching hospital payment plans and financial assistance programs. I list a few specific resources I found online and offer to help him apply for them. I don't mention our parents or the phone call or any of the family drama. I keep it focused on the actual problem instead of all the emotions around it. My finger hovers over the send button for another 5 minutes before I finally click it. The email disappears, and I immediately wonder if the address even works anymore, or if it'll just bounce back. I check my email obsessively for the next 3 days. Every notification makes my stomach jump, even when it's just work stuff or spam. I keep my phone next to me constantly and wake up in the middle of the night to see if he responded. Cillian notices me checking my phone at dinner and asks if I'm expecting something important. I tell him about the email, and he squeezes my hand across the table without saying anything. On the 3rd day, I get a response. Curtis writes back with just a few sentences thanking me for offering, but saying our parents already found another solution. He doesn't explain what solution they found or where the money came from. I read the message 5 times looking for hidden meaning or subtext, but it's just straightforward and brief. I feel this weird mix of relief that I don't have to get more involved and guilt that maybe I should have just given them the money. I hate that I'm still second-guessing myself about people who have never second-guessed treating me badly. My therapy appointment with Milena is 2 days later, and I bring up the phone call immediately. She listens while I recount the whole conversation, including the part where my mother listed all my childhood failures like evidence in a trial. Milena asks me to notice how I responded during different parts of the call, and I realize I got quieter and quieter as my mother talked. I fell right back into that pattern of just accepting whatever she said and getting smaller. I apologized for things that weren't my fault, just like I did when I was 10 years old. Milena points out that I also broke the pattern by speaking up at the end. She says the fact that I regressed initially doesn't erase the fact that I found my voice and set a boundary. I tell her it doesn't feel like enough because I still let her talk to me that way for most of the call. Milena reminds me that changing patterns takes time, and I shouldn't expect myself to be perfect at it immediately. She asks what I learned from the interaction, and I say, I learned my mother will never see me differently, no matter what I accomplish. Milena nods and says, that's actually important information, because now I can stop trying to prove myself to someone who refuses to see the proof. I spend the rest of the week checking my phone constantly, even though Curtis already responded. I keep expecting my parents to call back with more demands or anger, but there's nothing. The silence feels almost worse than another fight because it confirms what I already suspected. They were interested in my money, not in having any kind of relationship with me. If they actually cared about me as a person, they would have followed up or at least pretended to care how I was doing. Instead, they got told no and just disappeared again. I tell Milena about this in our next session, and she asks how that makes me feel. I say it makes me sad but also kind of free because now I don't have to wonder anymore if they might change. Work becomes the place where I can stop thinking about all of it. I throw myself into a new project designing a community center and spend hours at my desk working through details. I stay late 3 nights in a row and come in early twice. Joachim stops by my office on Friday afternoon and comments that I've been putting in a lot of extra hours lately. He asks if everything is okay and suggests I take a day off next week. I realize I've been using work to avoid dealing with my feelings about the whole family situation. I thank him and promise to take Monday off, even though the idea of having a whole day with nothing to distract me sounds awful. Alyssa catches me in the break room that afternoon and asks if I want to grab lunch. We go to a place down the street and order salads that we both barely touch while I tell her everything. I explain about being the family scapegoat and my brother's surgery and my father's call demanding money. I tell her about the phone call with my mother and how I finally stood up to her but still feel guilty. Alyssa listens without interrupting, and when I finish, she tells me she's been no contact with her father for 6 years. She says the guilt never completely goes away, but it does get easier over time. She explains that her father was controlling and manipulative and cutting him off was the healthiest thing she ever did for herself. Hearing someone I respect professionally talk about having similar family problems makes me feel less alone. Alyssa says something that really sticks with me. She tells me that choosing yourself isn't selfish when the alternative is setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. I know it's kind of a common saying, but hearing it from her makes it feel more real. She's successful and respected and clearly has her life together, and she made the same choice I'm making. That makes me feel like maybe I'm not broken or wrong for protecting myself from my parents. We finish lunch and go back to work, but I keep thinking about what she said. Maybe taking care of myself isn't the same thing as being a bad daughter. Maybe my parents made it impossible to do both. That night, I dig out an old journal from college that my therapist back then had me keep. I haven't written in it for years, but something makes me want to start again. I sit down with a pen and start writing out the whole pattern of blame from when I was born until now. I list specific incidents and see how they all connect into this system where nothing was ever my parents' fault. Every job loss and money problem and family issue got blamed on me or later on Curtis. I write about how they never took responsibility for their drinking, or their refusal to see doctors, or their poor financial choices. Seeing it all laid out on paper helps me understand it as a pattern, instead of just random bad moments. It wasn't about me being unlucky or cursed. It was about them needing someone to blame so they didn't have to look at themselves. Cillian suggests we take a weekend trip to get away from everything. He finds a tiny cottage on the coast and books it for the following weekend. We drive out Friday after work, and I feel some of the tension leave my shoulders as we get further from the city. The cottage is small and old, but right on the beach. I spend Saturday morning walking along the sand by myself while Cillian sleeps in. The ocean is cold and gray, and the wind whips my hair around, but I keep walking. I think about how the physical distance from my hometown mirrors the emotional distance I'm trying to keep. Being 4 hours away isn't enough sometimes. I need to be here where they can't reach me and where I can hear myself think. Walking on the beach, I have this moment of clarity that feels obvious but also new. My parents' whole narrative about me being bad luck was never actually about me. I was 6 months old when my dad lost his job. I was 2 when my mom got in a car accident. I didn't cause those things, but it was easier for them to blame a baby than admit my dad got fired for performance issues, or my mom was driving distracted. Every bad thing that happened after that got added to the story because they needed the story to be true. If I was the problem, then they didn't have to change anything about themselves. They could keep making poor financial decisions and refusing to deal with their health and blaming it all on their unlucky daughter. The realization doesn't make it hurt less, but it does make it make sense. It was never about me. It was always about them. I get back to my condo and dig through my contacts until I find Hallie's number. We haven't talked in months because life got busy and we both kept meaning to call but never did. She answers on the 3rd ring, sounding surprised and happy to hear from me. We spend the first 10 minutes catching up on basic stuff like her new job and my promotion and how her cat is doing. Then I tell her about the whole situation with my parents calling for money and Curtis's surgery and how I'm trying to figure out what I owe them after everything. Hallie listens without interrupting, and when I finish, she reminds me of freshman year when I apologized to our dorm neighbor for breathing too loud. She says I used to apologize for existing, and now I'm setting boundaries with people who spent 18 years making me feel worthless. She tells me she's proud of how far I've come, and I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until the words hit me. We talk for another hour about everything and nothing, and it feels good to just exist with someone who knew me when I was still learning how to be a person. Near the end of the call, Hallie mentions she's getting engaged next month and planning a spring wedding. She asks if I'll be in the wedding party, and I say yes immediately without thinking about it. The request fills me with this pure joy that has nothing to do with my family drama. This is my life now. These are the people who chose me, and I chose them back. After we hang up, I sit on my couch feeling lighter than I have in weeks. The next day, I'm cleaning out my closet looking for a jacket I haven't worn in years when I find a cardboard box shoved in the back corner. Inside are old family photos my mom gave me when I moved out, pictures from childhood I never looked at because they made me feel weird. I pull them out one by one and spread them across my bed. There's me at 5 years old at a birthday party looking at the camera with this sad expression, even though everyone around me is smiling. Me at 8 in a school photo with my shoulders hunched like I'm trying to disappear. Me at 12 standing next to Curtis at some family gathering while he grins and I look at the ground. In every single photo I can see it now. The sadness in my eyes even during supposedly happy moments. I was carrying their blame before I even understood what it meant. I sort through the whole box and keep only 3 photos, ones where I'm alone or with friends from high school who actually liked me. The rest go into a donation bag because I don't need physical reminders of a childhood I've spent years trying to unlearn. At my next session with Milena, she asks what I want my relationship with my family to look like going forward. The question catches me off guard because I've been so focused on what I don't want that I haven't thought about what I do want. I sit there for a full minute trying to figure out how to answer. Finally, I tell her I don't want no contact forever, because that feels like letting them win in a different way. But I also can't go back to accepting their version of reality where everything wrong in their lives is somehow my fault. Milena nods and suggests we practice potential future interactions, so I can maintain boundaries without getting defensive or trying to change their minds. We spend the rest of the session role-playing different scenarios. Milena plays my mother accusing me of abandoning the family, and I practice responding calmly without explaining myself or arguing. It's way harder than I expected. Every time Milena throws an accusation at me in my mother's voice, I feel myself getting smaller and quieter like I'm 15 again. We run through the same conversation 5 times before I can get through it without either shutting down or getting angry. Milena tells me that's normal, that years of conditioning don't disappear just because I understand them now. That night, I sit down with my laptop and start writing a letter I don't plan to send. I write out everything I wish I could say to my parents about the damage their scapegoating caused. I write about being 10 years old and believing I was cursed. About paying for my own school supplies at 16 because I didn't want to be a burden. About graduating college with honors and still waiting for them to be proud of me. About building a whole life 4 hours away because I couldn't breathe in their house anymore. The letter ends up being 4 pages long, and when I finish writing it, I feel this pressure release in my chest that I didn't know I was holding. I save it in a folder on my computer and close the laptop. A month passes with no contact from my parents, and I almost forget about the whole thing. Then Curtis emails me out of nowhere with a brief update that his surgery went well, and he's recovering at home. The email is only 3 sentences long, but at the end he adds this awkward line thanking me for offering to help, even though they ended up not needing it. It's the closest thing to an apology I've ever gotten from him, and I read it 5 times trying to figure out if I'm reading too much into it. I wait a day before responding so I don't seem too eager. I write back saying I'm glad he's okay, and that I'm here if he ever wants to talk. No pressure. I keep it short and leave the door open for future contact without pushing him. Building some kind of relationship with Curtis separate from our parents feels possible in a way reconciling with them doesn't. He's starting to see things differently, and maybe that's enough for now. At work the following week, Joachim calls me into his office, and I spend the whole walk there wondering what I did wrong. Instead, he tells me I'm being assigned to lead a major project designing a new public library downtown. It's the biggest project of my career so far, and I just stand there staring at him trying to process the information. Joachim says I earned it through 5 years of consistent, excellent work, and he trusts me to handle it. I actually let myself believe him instead of waiting for the other shoe to drop, or for him to realize he made a mistake. The project consumes my focus for the next few weeks in the best way possible. I'm using skills I've developed over years of pushing myself to prove I wasn't cursed or unlucky or whatever my parents called me. I work late most nights sketching ideas and meeting with the design team and presenting concepts to the client. Halfway through a presentation, I catch myself thinking my parents would probably say, "This success won't last," that something will fall apart because that's what happens to me. Then I consciously choose to ignore that voice and keep talking about load-bearing walls and natural light optimization. The client loves the design. Joachim walks me back to my desk after the presentation and mentions that the team wants to grab drinks Friday to celebrate landing the project. I tell him I'll be there, feeling this weird mix of pride and disbelief that I'm leading something this big. Cillian texts me that afternoon asking how the presentation went, and I send back 3 celebration emojis because I don't trust myself to put it into words without sounding too excited. He responds immediately saying we should do something special this weekend. 2 days later, he tells me he made reservations at that Italian place downtown and invited Alyssa plus a few people from my office. I spend 20 minutes staring at my closet trying to figure out what to wear to a celebration dinner for my own success, which feels ridiculous but also kind of nice. We meet at the restaurant Friday night, and there's this moment when I walk in and see everyone already sitting at a table waiting for me. Alyssa waves me over and Cillian pulls out my chair like this is some kind of formal event. Joachim ordered appetizers for the table and keeps talking about how impressed the client was with my presentation. I sit there listening to people I work with every day say genuinely nice things about my work, and it hits me that this is what normal feels like. Nobody's waiting for me to fail. Nobody's making jokes about how long my luck will last. These people actually like having me around and think I'm good at what I do. Alyssa raises her glass and says something about how she knew I'd be running projects within a year of mentoring me. The whole table toasts, and I have to blink back tears because I've never had people celebrate me like this. My parents threw my brother a huge party when he got into college, but told me not to make a big deal about my scholarship. This dinner with work friends means more to me than any family gathering ever did. The next week, my phone reminds me it's my mother's birthday. I stare at the notification for a solid minute before swiping it away. Every single year since I left home, I've called her on her birthday, even when she barely acknowledged mine. This year, I don't pick up the phone. I feel guilty for about an hour, that old familiar knot in my stomach that says I'm being a bad daughter. Then I remember she didn't call on my last birthday, breaking her yearly pattern of checking in to see if I'd failed yet. She couldn't even bother with her usual concerned voice asking how I was holding up. The guilt fades pretty quick after that. I spend the rest of the day working on project plans, and don't think about her again until Cillian asks that evening if I talk to my family. I tell him no, and he just nods, squeezes my hand, doesn't push me to explain. My next session with Milena happens 2 weeks later instead of our usual weekly schedule. She suggested spacing them out since I've been doing better, and I agreed, even though part of me still wants that weekly check-in. We spend the first few minutes catching up on the project and the dinner and my mother's birthday. Milena leans back in her chair and says something that catches me off guard. She tells me I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm actually doing well, building a life based on what I value instead of just reacting to my family's rejection. I sit with that for a minute because she's right. The condo, the job, the relationship with Cillian, the friendships with Alyssa and my coworkers, none of it happened because I was running away from my parents. It happened because I chose it. I built it on purpose. Milena asks how that feels, and I tell her it feels weird and good and sometimes scary because there's this voice in my head that still expects it all to fall apart. She reminds me that voice belongs to my mother, not to me, and I get to decide whether to listen to it. 3 weeks after that, I get a text from an unknown number. I almost delete it thinking it's spam, but something makes me open it. The message says it's Curtis and asks if we could meet for coffee when he's in my city next week for a follow-up appointment. My immediate reaction is this spike of anxiety that surprises me. I thought I was past caring what my brother thought. I stare at the message for 10 minutes trying to figure out what he wants. Part of me wants to ignore it, but another part is curious about why he's reaching out now. I text back saying, sure, we can meet at a coffee shop near the hospital, somewhere public where I can leave if it gets weird. He responds with a thumbs up emoji and a time. I spend the next week wondering if I made a mistake agreeing to this. Curtis shows up looking healthier than I've seen him in years. He's gained some weight back and doesn't have that gray, exhausted look he had when I saw him at the hospital. We order coffee and sit at a corner table, and the first 10 minutes are so awkward I almost regret coming. He asks about work, and I give short answers. I ask about his recovery, and he does the same. We're dancing around whatever he actually wants to say. Then he puts his cup down and looks at me directly for the first time. He tells me he's been thinking a lot during recovery about how our family worked, how things went down when we were kids. He says he's starting to see things differently now that he's had time away from the house. I don't say anything, just wait for him to keep talking. He mentions how our parents freaked out when he needed surgery, how they couldn't handle the stress of actually having to take care of someone. He watched them scramble and panic and blame everyone but themselves for not having money saved. It made him realize some things he didn't want to see before. He doesn't give me a full apology, and I don't expect one. What he does say is that he knows he benefited from being the golden child while I got blamed for everything. He admits he went along with it because it was easier than questioning them. He says watching our parents scramble for money and fall apart over his medical bills made him realize they're not actually good at taking care of anyone, including themselves. They just needed someone to blame, and I was convenient. I appreciate his honesty more than I expected to. I don't need him to completely reject our parents or validate every single thing I went through. Just hearing him acknowledge that the family dynamic was messed up and he played a role in it feels like enough. We end up talking for almost 2 hours, way longer than I planned. We talk about college and how he dropped out, about the years he spent in their house playing video games because he didn't know what else to do. He asks about my life now and actually listens when I tell him about the architecture firm and Cillian and my condo. Before we leave, we agree to stay in touch. Maybe build something new instead of trying to fix a sibling relationship that never really existed in the first place. Near the end of our conversation, Curtis mentions he's finally looking for a real job. He's been applying to places and has a few interviews lined up. He says our parents are upset about him wanting to move out, that they keep telling him he's not ready or he should save money first. I realize sitting there listening to him that they need someone to manage and control. When I left, they still had Curtis, but now that he's getting healthier and wanting independence, they're losing their grip. Without me there to blame, Curtis became the target in different ways. Not the scapegoat exactly, but the project, the person they could hover over and make decisions for. He's starting to see it now and wants out. After Curtis leaves, I sit in my car for a few minutes before driving home. Then I call Milena, even though it's not our session day. She answers and I tell her about the meeting, about everything Curtis said. I'm surprised by how much lighter I feel. Having Curtis acknowledge even part of the family dysfunction makes me feel less crazy about my decision to distance myself. Milena says that makes sense, that sometimes having one person validate your experience can shift everything. She asks how I feel about staying in touch with him, and I tell her cautiously hopeful. I don't expect him to become my best friend or anything, but having one family member who's willing to be honest feels like something worth keeping. That night, Cillian asks if I think my parents will ever change. We're sitting on the couch with my cat curled up between us, and he's asking the question carefully like he's not sure if I want to talk about it. I think about it for a real minute before answering. I tell him I've stopped needing them to change. Whether they grow or learn or stay exactly the same doesn't have to determine my peace anymore. I built a life without them, and it's good. If they want to be part of it someday, they'll have to meet me where I am instead of expecting me to shrink back into the role they assigned me. Cillian nods and pulls me closer, and we sit there in comfortable silence. The cat stretches and digs her claws into my leg, and I don't even mind. Because this moment right here, this quiet evening in my own home with someone who loves me, and a pet who didn't run away, this is the life I chose, and it's enough. The holidays sneak up faster than I expect. November arrives with cold mornings and early darkness, and suddenly everyone at work is talking about Thanksgiving plans. Cillian asks what I want to do, and I realize for the first time in my life, I don't have to dread the obligatory phone call home or feel guilty for not showing up. I tell him I want to host something at our place, invite people who actually want to be around us. He grins and starts making a list of friends to invite. We spend a week planning the menu and cleaning the condo, and I catch myself actually excited instead of anxious. Alyssa brings wine and homemade rolls. 2 of Cillian's co-workers show up with desserts. My cat hides under the bed for the first hour, then slowly creeps out to investigate all the new people. We crowd around my small dining table that barely fits everyone, and pass dishes family style, and it feels warm and real in a way holidays at my parents' house never did. Halfway through dinner, Alyssa refills her wine glass and asks how I'm doing with all this, gesturing at the table like she means more than just the food. I take a minute to think about my answer because she deserves honesty. I tell her I'm sad about what could have been, about the family I should have had but didn't. But I'm not willing to sacrifice my well-being anymore for people who refuse to see me clearly. She raises her glass and says, that's the healthiest thing she's heard all year. Everyone else raises their glasses too, and we toast to chosen family and new traditions, and I feel something settle in my chest that's been unsettled for years. My phone buzzes during dessert, and I almost ignore it, but something makes me check. It's a text from Curtis. Just a few words saying he's thinking of me and hopes I'm having a good day. Nothing elaborate or emotional, just brief and genuine. I stare at the message for a long moment, then save it to a folder I've started keeping of the few good family moments I have. It's not much, but it's real, and that matters more than I expected it to. I text back a simple thanks and same to you, then put my phone away and rejoin the conversation. Cillian catches my eye across the table and I smile at him, feeling hopeful about having at least one family connection that isn't built on blame and dysfunction. Work picks up the week after Thanksgiving as we push toward the project launch deadline. I spend long hours at the office finalizing details and coordinating with contractors, and somehow it all comes together better than I imagined. The community center opens in early December, and the local architecture magazine sends someone to photograph it and interview me about the design process. When the article comes out 2 weeks later, Joachim frames it and hangs it in my office without asking. He just walks in one morning with the framed magazine page and a drill and puts it on the wall across from my desk. I stare at it for a solid minute, reading my own name in print next to photos of something I created. Joachim tells me to let myself feel proud without qualifying it with worry about what might go wrong next. I nod and actually try to do that, sitting with the accomplishment instead of immediately looking for ways it might fall apart. My next session with Milena happens a few days before Christmas. We've been meeting every other week since the whole Curtis surgery situation, but she opens this session by asking if I think I'm ready to reduce to monthly check-ins. The question catches me off guard. I think about the past few months and realize the family crisis didn't destroy the stability I've built. I handled it without falling apart, or reverting to old patterns for more than brief moments. I tell Milena yes, I think I'm ready, and she smiles like she already knew my answer. We spend the rest of the session talking about what monthly check-ins will look like, and what warning signs to watch for that might mean I need more frequent support again. Walking out of her office, I feel proud in a different way than the magazine article. This pride is quieter and deeper, about emotional work nobody sees, but that matters just as much. Cillian and I are washing dishes one night when he brings up the future in a way that feels different from our usual vague planning. He asks if I've thought about getting engaged, and my immediate reaction is to check myself for panic about cursing our relationship. But the panic doesn't come. I dry a plate and tell him honestly that I have thought about it and I don't feel scared anymore. I've learned my presence in people's lives isn't a burden but a gift. He stops washing and looks at me with this expression I can't quite name, and says we should talk seriously about it then. We spend the next hour on the couch mapping out what we want our lives to look like, and it's easy and exciting instead of heavy with dread about inevitable failure. I write the letter to my parents on a Saturday morning while Cillian is at the gym. I've written versions of this letter before but never sent them, always talking myself out of it or deciding silence was safer. This time I keep it brief and clear. I explain I'm open to contact if they can respect me as an adult with my own life, but I won't accept blame or manipulation anymore. I outline specific boundaries about what kind of relationship I'm willing to have and what behaviors I won't tolerate. I read it 3 times, checking for anything that sounds like I'm asking for their approval or trying to convince them I'm worthy. Then I address an envelope and walk to the mailbox before I can change my mind. The letter drops through the slot with a soft thud, and I stand there for a moment feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. 3 weeks pass with no response. I check the mail every day even though I told myself I wouldn't. Cillian asks if I'm okay, and I realize I actually am. Their silence is an answer in itself. Some people aren't capable of the relationship I deserve, and that's about them, not me. I stop checking the mail obsessively and focus on the life I'm building instead of the one I'll never have with them. Curtis calls in mid-January, and I answer on the 3rd ring. He sounds different, more energetic than I've heard him in years. He tells me he got a job offer at a tech support company, and he's moving into his own apartment next month. His voice shakes a little when he talks about it, nervous but excited, and I encourage him genuinely. I tell him I'm happy he's building his own independence, and I mean it. We talk for 20 minutes about his apartment search and his new job, and it's the most normal sibling conversation we've ever had. Before we hang up, he thanks me again for meeting with him back in November, and says it helped him see things more clearly. I tell him he did the hard work himself, I just listened. After the call, I sit in my home office looking at the framed magazine article on my wall. My cat jumps into my lap and starts purring, and I pet her absently while thinking about how far I've come. I realized somewhere along the way I stopped thinking of myself as the family scapegoat and started seeing myself as someone who survived a difficult childhood and built something beautiful anyway. The shift in identity feels huge, like stepping into a version of myself I always wanted to be but didn't think I deserved. I'm not the cursed daughter or the bad luck charm or the burden they tried to make me believe I was. I'm just someone who refused to accept their story about who I had to be and wrote a better one instead. I'm sitting on the couch Tuesday night with my feet tucked under me, watching Cillian rinse dinner plates at the sink. He turns around and wipes his hands on a dish towel, then walks over and sits next to me without saying anything at first. My cat jumps down from the armrest and disappears into the bedroom. Cillian takes my hand and his palm feels warm against mine. He tells me he doesn't want to wait for some perfect moment because our regular life together is already perfect. He asks if I'll marry him, and his voice is steady but his hand trembles slightly in mine. I say yes before he finishes the question, tears already sliding down my cheeks. He pulls a simple silver ring from his pocket and slides it onto my finger. We sit there crying and laughing at the same time, and I think about how this moment isn't cursed or doomed or temporary. It's just real and good and mine. We spend the next hour calling people to share the news. Hallie answers on the first ring, and I barely get the words out before she screams so loud I have to hold the phone away from my ear. She's already talking about engagement party colors and venue options before I can tell her we haven't planned anything yet. Alyssa congratulates us and says she knew it was coming, because she's never seen two people fit together so naturally. Each call feels easy and happy without any weight of family drama or waiting for someone to tell me it won't last. I text Curtis because calling feels too formal for where we are in rebuilding our relationship. He responds within minutes saying he's happy for me and asking if he can meet Cillian sometime. I type back yes immediately and mean it completely. Having one family member who's genuinely trying to show up differently feels like more than I expected to have. Over the next few weeks, planning the wedding becomes something I actually enjoy instead of a source of stress about who to invite or who might ruin things. Cillian and I look at venues with Hallie and laugh at her increasingly elaborate ideas. We pick a small garden space that feels intimate and warm. I make a guest list of people who actually want to celebrate with us, not people I'm obligated to include. Curtis texts occasionally asking about details and offering to help with setup. I add him to the list without hesitation. The whole process feels light and joyful because I'm surrounded by people who chose me and I chose them back. I realize one night while addressing invitations that this is the family I needed all along. Not the one I was born into that treated me like a burden, but the one I built myself from friends and partners, and the one brother who decided to do better. That's not bad luck or a curse finally breaking. That's just the best thing I ever did for myself.